Let's first look at equities and equity related products. As I mentioned, equities are also known as stocks. So if you own stocks in a company, you're owning equity in that company. You're a stockholder, you're a shareholder, and you own a certain piece of that company depending on how many stocks or how many shares you own. Besides owning stock directly, there are also several other asset classes that are based on equities. And the largest of them is mutual funds. And I'm sure most people have heard of mutual funds. It's a pooled vehicle. What that means is a company like Fidelity, for example, may open a mutual fund for the technology sector. So under the technology sector, you'll have various companies like Microsoft, Google, Apple, so on and so forth. And they actually have a very well diversified set of companies that will go into the mutual fund. Mutual fund is highly regulated. So if they say that it's a technology mutual fund, then by their charter, they are only allowed to invest in the technology sector. So it's the largest, like we said, it's about 35 trillion worldwide. It's been around for many decades and it's tried and tested. There's a few negatives with it, which we'll go into when we look at the mutual funds section. And ETFs are also a pooled vehicle. And ETFs actually take care of some of the negatives of what mutual funds face. And they're becoming very large, they're becoming very popular. And we'll take a look at ETFs. In fact, ETFs is just a fascinating instrument for beginners to financial markets. So I would highly recommend that you focus on ETFs, and especially because I'm going to give you my first key strategy to making profits in a low risk but a high reward manner. Similarly, index funds also hold stocks in the index, and we'll be looking at what exactly an index is. Frankly, I think everybody might have heard of the index as well. Every country's stock markets has indexes. In the US, we have the S&P 500, which is the broadest market index. We also have the NASDAQ, we also have the Russell 2000, and of course the Dow Jones Industrial Average. Now, several hedge funds and private equity firms also hold equity in companies. So now these hedge funds and private equity firms are going to be large. There are going to be mutual funds that hold equity. There are going to be hedge funds that hold equity. There are going to be private equity firms that will hold equity. There are also going to be some pension funds and other kinds of institutions that will hold equity directly in a company. Now, obviously, like we mentioned, pension funds look for safety. However, they might put a small sliver of their funds into some higher reward asset classes like equities. So you'll see a lot of that as well. Now, stocks in general are fairly high on the risk and reward graph. So what we mean is if you own a stock, it can go very high, it can go very low. So your risk and your reward is pretty high with stocks. Now, this is if you compare it to bonds, there's very little risk because it's a fixed income instrument we'll be covering next. So we'll get to that. But stocks are fairly high on risk and reward. Mutual funds and ETFs and index funds are diversified. So all of these hold multiple positions in multiple companies, and therefore they have an automatic diversification into them. And therefore they are slightly lesser risky than holding stocks directly for an investor. Let's get into the next one, which is the introduction to fixed income and bonds. Thanks.